ever heard about those Lord of the Rings books? J.R.R. Tolkien, he's a Christian fellow, and he lived in England a long time ago, 100 years. And he had an idea to write stories about a made-up place with made-up races of creatures and whatnot. It was really, really good. There was a whole movie and everything about it that came out here a few years ago. A lot of people really liked it. And in that movie and in that book, there's a character in the middle whose name is Wormtongue. It's actually his name. And his job is advisor to the king, King Theoden, the king of Rohan. And what happens is that you meet this guy, Wormtongue, and you realize right off the bat as the viewer or the reader that dude he's bad. You know it. Tolkien, he makes no effort whatsoever to disguise it. The guy's name is Wormtongue, for crying out loud. You can tell he's horrible. Now, of course, immediately you wonder to yourself how the king of Rohan came to accept the counsel of a man whose last name is Wormtongue. You would think that when a guy like that shows up and says, hello, I was inquiring about the chief advisor position that you advertised in the Thrifty Nickel. I brought my resume, and the king's like, well, let's take a look at that right now. What do I have here? Okay, your impressive experience. I notice your name is Wormtongue. Now, this is a job that involves a lot of talking, something that heavily involves the tongue. Worms are generally associated with things that are dirty and slimy. You know, I hate to judge a book by its cover, but there's just so much at stake, what with me being king of the whole kingdom and having all these subjects. I would just be sick to my stomach if I didn't trust my gut here and pass on this particular resume because of how your last name is exactly a metaphor for exactly the kind of person who would be exactly wrong for this job. Thank you so much. I mean, we'll keep your application on file. If anything changes, we'll let you know. That's what he should have done, but he didn't do that. And instead, he receives him as his advisor, and Rohan is in a really important position in the unfolding of all this big story that's being told. And the good guys show up to the court of good King Theoden, and they're like, we're going to need your help, but something's wrong. And you can tell right away that Theoden isn't making any sense, and there's this guy whispering in his ear, this weasel, this Wormtongue type, and once again, Tolkien has totally made it clear to you as the reader or the viewer, he's very bad, but the people there can't totally see it. There's a bunch of people in the room, most notably the king, the guy whose will is law. He's the one who needs to see through it, but he just can't see through it. Now, straight up, Wormtongue, I think, is maybe directly derived from or inspired by Haman from the book of Esther. If he's not, it is quite the fancy accident for somebody who was into the Bible as much as J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of that story, was. But it is such a gratifying moment as you're going through that story, and finally the king comes to his senses. Finally things change, and everybody sees this dude for what he is, because you could tell from the beginning that he was horrible, and now everybody sees it. And I like those kind of moments in books and stories because there's something very cathartic about that thing where you're like, whoa, how can people not see what's going on, even in real life, you know, where you get a situation at work, or maybe it's a politician or something, and everybody's just gaga over this lady, gaga over this guy, and you're going, I'm telling you, they are bad, and putting this person in positions of influence is bad. And then when that finally comes to light, you're like, see? Okay, good. Finally, justice is done. It's really embarrassing when you're wrong. You totally misevaluate somebody, but just forget about that part or possibility and just don't think about that at all. In Esther chapter 7, we get that payoff. Finally, the one character we need to open his eyes and see who this idiot is who is dumping corrupting poison into his ear. We need the king to come to his senses and understand who that guy is and be done with him once and for all, because we can't really get to justice and rightness and resolution to this story until the king sees who this guy is. And finally, in Esther chapter 7, the king sees who this guy is. Esther, at her second banquet with King Xerxes and the enemy of the Jews, Haman, who's trying to kill all the Jews, kill Mordecai, kill everybody, she says to the king, I'd like it if you would spare my life, me and my people, for we are sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. If we were just getting sold like to be slaves or something like that, I wouldn't even bother you because you have a ton of things going on right now. And the king is like, what now? I don't think we were going to kill you. Well, who is he? Where's the man who dared to do such a thing? Xerxes asks, and Esther says, the adversary and enemy is the vile Haman. And she implicates him. I've even seen some really cool classical art where she dramatically points toward Haman, and her posture is amazing, and the point of her finger is absolutely damning. And it really does. If you saw the Peter Jackson version of The Lord of the Rings, the moment where Wormtongue is finally confronted and outed is very dramatic as well. We get this, and Haman is terrified, and the king is furious and maybe a little bit embarrassed because his signet ring got used to do this. So the king goes outside in an angry huff to do whatever it is that he does out there. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Now, look, I don't know how you beg other people's wives for your life. I have never had to do that before, but I'm running the scenario in my brain right now. I'm trying to think, how would it be most effective for me to get a former friend to not kill me by persuading his wife that she should go to bat for me? And let me tell you what never comes into my mind in any way when I picture that scenario. It's like falling on top of her on a couch. Never. That's not any of them. I don't think that's the right posture to assume before the queen. And because of that, things are going to get even worse. Look at what he does. Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. The king got up in a rage and went outside. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she's with me in the house?" Now, look, you could read this language as Haman is just innocently falling like right next to Esther, who would be reclining on the couch. And by the way, you kind of got to picture how they ate in ancient times. Even if you go to parts of the Middle East now, I mean, you kind of recline while you eat. That sort of blew my mind the first time that happened. I went to a restaurant with this kind of seating, and it's like we all get this little kind of half bed, half couch thing. And we get like figs and these different kinds of breads and stuff. And I realized we're supposed to be here for a very long time. This is not fast food by any stretch of the imagination. So reclining would be a normal thing to do at the table in the ancient world, in the Persian world. And maybe we could read the language here of the author as being that Haman just ran over there and like climbed on the same couch as Queen Esther. That's pretty weird. Pretty presumptuous. Maybe we could read the language as having him be so out of sorts and so frazzled that he was even not conscious enough of his body language and asserted himself in a way that would be much more suggestive. Either way, this is the dude's mistake. He demonstrates that he does not understand the king he serves. He doesn't know how the guy's wired. He doesn't know how the dude ticks. Why did he go outside? One good possibility is to figure out how he was going to get out of this because he's frustrated at the situation. And what do we know about King Xerxes from outside the Bible? From this book here, that's Herodotus. What do we know from inside the Bible? That's this book here. We know that Xerxes doesn't like looking stupid. We know that he's very influenceable, that he gets himself into trouble a lot, and that then he tries to think of ways to save face. The shrewd person who understands who they're dealing with will give him an out. The stupid person will give him an excuse to implicate them and make them the bad guy. Haman doesn't understand how Xerxes is wired. All Xerxes is looking for is an excuse, and Haman gives it to him with his sloppy, inappropriate, desperate conduct. It's very subtle, but what we are really seeing here with this high point moment where the stakes of everything are coming right down to the wire is that it's a contest to see who can manipulate the king better. It's a contest to see who is more shrewd. And in the end, Haman proved to be stupid and frazzleable and flusterable, and therefore capable of making the worst decisions at the worst times. But Esther has ice in her veins. She handled her business. She knew that when you get the answer you want, you hang up the phone. She doesn't say a lot of words. She only says what she needs to say. She doesn't answer any of the begging. She just lays there on her couch and lets the thing play out. Indeed, this all came down to a competition to who knew the king better, who had been more attentive, who knew his insecurities, and who knew how to prop him up and give him off-ramps to get out of the difficult situations he made for himself. And guess what? Those talents that we saw Esther put on display clear back here when she was winning that questionable contest to become queen and winning over the whole harem and winning over all of the attendants and all of the eunuchs so that she was the sweetheart of the competition and the palace. That same skill set that she had when she was a young lady, she just figured out how to weaponize that for the sake of all of her people. And Haman is simply completely outclassed by her at this game. And again, because of that, we get the Wormtongue moment payoff here. Finally, the king sees who he's been dealing with. The scales fall off of his eyes. He can tell that Haman is the problem with the whole thing. Esther, of course, teed it up perfectly so that he would see it. And now the only question remaining is, what's going to happen to Haman? Probably next time around would be a good time to talk about that. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.